Wallace is a short film about a bullied, hearing-impaired boy whose drawings come to life one day. On Wallace, we had a little bit of a budget, but everything was spent on the things in front of the camera. We rented a school for a day, we rented this old factory, and all the actors and extras were compensated and fed. But the audience won't see what's behind the scenes anyway, so that's where we saved a lot of money. Our boom pole was a painter's pole with a mic screw attached. Our dolly was apart from an IKEA shelf with skateboard wheels screwed on, and the tracks were PVC pipe. So when it came to the visual effects of the film, I had to do them myself. Now, I've done a lot of 2D animation, but I was pretty new to 3D. And since I had to learn a piece of 3D software from scratch, I figured, why not Blender? It's both free and open source, and it also has compositing and other tools built in. And since the characters were supposed to be 2D creatures in a 3D world, the transition wasn't as big for me as going from 2D to full 3D modeling. This is the first time one of Wallace's drawings comes to life. Now, Blender has a built-in 3D camera tracker, which means that you can track a bunch of points in your footage, and then Blender recreates the camera move. So in this case, we could place this animated texture on top of the drawing pad. To make sure that all the CG blended in with the footage, I shot some out-of-focus neutral gray fabric with my camera, so I would have a sample of the grain that the camera produces. I would then overlay that grain onto any added elements to make them look like they were shot with that same camera. When the creature stands up, I figured that we only had to see a little bit of it in the foreground, so instead of making it CG, I just printed out the creature on a piece of paper and puppeteered it with my hands in front of a green screen. And the green screen in this case was just a piece of green cloth from IKEA. You can actually find a lot of good low-budget filmmaking stuff at IKEA if you're a bit creative about it. When the creature flies over to the bed was actually one of the harder shots to do because, as I found out, it's really difficult to get a good 3D camera track when all of the tracking points at the start of the shot have left the frame at the end of it. But since the creature is flying, it's harder to tell that it's not a perfect track. It would have been a lot more difficult if the creature was standing on something. The film is in a wider sort of cinemascope format, but it was shot in standard 16:9 widescreen. What that meant was that in shots that were on a tripod and locked off, I could add a bit of tilting up and down. So a shot like this, I didn't have to do a full 3D track since the camera wasn't moving, but I could still get some subtle movement. In these locked off shots, I used a plugin for Blender called Blam. With that, you basically just draw a couple of lines in a still image, and Blam helps you calculate the camera position and recreate the environment in 3D. My favorite part of the film is when Wallace's graffiti painting comes to life. This first shot of the creature is actually a still image with camera movement added in Blender. All the animated textures were animated in Blender's node editor as well. The blinking could be animated, and the eyeball is a separate image whose position can be animated. The hand coming out of the wall was also still images, where I animated the individual vertices in the hand. When the fingers let go, there's some dust or debris coming off of the wall. That's actually flour that I shot in front of some black cloth, probably from IKEA. When the legs come out, there's more flour puffs added. I animated the individual vertices here as well because I didn't know how to make it look like the legs were sticking to the wall if they use some kind of bone rig, which is how you usually animate characters in 3D software. I still have a lot to learn in Blender. Later on, Wallace is in his room with all of his creations. The graffiti creature has fixed his broken hearing aid for him. The hearing aid here is one of the few actual 3D modeled objects in the film. I modeled it after the real hearing aid and then projected a photo of it onto the model as a texture. When Wallace walks up to the creature, I did a little bit of a shadow cheat to help sell that the monster is in the environment. You'll notice that as Wallace approaches, there's a shadow of Wallace on the creature. I just cut out a copy of Wallace, made it black and blurry, and laid it on top of the monster. It's not a technically accurate shadow in any way, but it moves in sync with Wallace, and it helps sell the illusion that the creature is actually there. When we leave Wallace in his room, it's one of the few times he's actually in front of one of these creatures, since whenever that happens, you have to cut out Wallace so the creature's not in front of him. Blender has some really good rotoscoping tools, but it's still a pain in the ass to do, so I try to avoid it as much as possible. There's also some more shadow cheating on the creature here. This shot of the flying heart creature is probably my least favorite one because it was so hard to integrate into the shot. When you have a creature sitting on a desk or flying close to a wall, you can have shadows to help sell that it's really there. But in most of this creature's flight, there's nowhere to cast a shadow, so it can look a bit pasted onto the film. As soon as it approaches the locker and we get some shadows, I think it immediately looks a bit better. And we cut away here so that we can put in a real paper heart creature into the scene. Towards the end of the film, there's a lot of shots of the creatures in the factory environment. There's a lot of still images or locked off shots here that I used a Blam plugin on. In this shot, I was standing on a tall ladder, so I had to go handheld with the camera, which meant that I had to track the shot. But since I tried to hold the camera as still as possible and we don't see any of the creatures in contact with the ground, a simple one-point track in Blender was enough to get a good enough camera move. So that was some of the visual effects in Wallace. I hope you enjoyed, and go check out Blender. It's pretty awesome.